All right, we are live. Hello, everybody, and good evening, good afternoon. Maybe some of you guys are good morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome. So we're here today with Roun. I'm really excited to have Roun here with us today. We're going to talk about mindful parenting, conscious parenting, a topic that's just very near and dear to my heart. So if it's near and dear to your heart as well, share away, and we'll get a lot of people here in the conversation today together. We're going to start with Roun introducing herself, introducing what makes her her, what makes you who you are, the kind of work that you do, and what led you to this work. Roun, welcome. Thank you so much for taking your time to be here with us today. And go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So my name is Roun. I'm a mother. I have 3 kids. I am also a therapist. I've been working um, now as a therapist for about 6 years. I work with families. I work with adults, with children, and I also do groups. So I also run a parenting group. And it's for moms to sort of meet and have a space to talk and ask questions and just get support. I'm also a PhD student, so I'm studying family science, and my research interests are trauma, parenting, and identity development. And what led me to doing that work, so when I started off doing therapy, I noticed that a lot of the kids that I was working with, their parents were also having similar struggles. So I wanted to know what the connection was with parenting and the parents' own background, the parents' own trauma, and how that impacts the way that they parent and how that impacts their child. So in order to do that, I would have to pursue a PhD to sort of like delve in a little bit more into that topic, because as a therapist, you're sort of like just there working with your client. You can't really dig into like family systems and what leads to what. So it was that passion that drove me to pursuing another degree, and to learn more about this so that inshallah I can take what I find and maybe create some programs and just really give back to the community and in ways that we can build healthier families so that we have healthier generations.
Wow, I'm absolutely blown away, and I shared like some of my excitement with you earlier. How exciting, this topic is, for me, for us in the Somali context. I'm really interested in how we can apply mindful parenting and conscious parenting in our family systems, given our cultural context and the nuances that come with our culture. So, just a kind of a brief information, if you could give us about what mindful parenting is, like what is conscious parenting?
Yeah, so mindful parenting, conscious parenting, there's like intentional parenting. It's basically being aware of how you're parenting, the energy that you're putting in, being aware of like what your goals are for parenting. And this was new to me, like in my parenting journey, like as a parent, I didn't know. Parenting to me was like you have the kid and you raise the kid, you like clothe the kid, feed the kid, and that's it. Like the emotional connection, like teaching them all these other things about like communication, just like raising a well-rounded child. Like none of that was something that I even knew was a part of parenting. So myself learning that and seeing, okay, wow, like this is what parenting really is, and wow, like parenting is so much more than just having a kid. Like it's a lot of work. So mindful parenting and conscious parenting is actually being aware and intentional of how you're parenting, how what goals you have for your child, like what type of adult are you trying to raise? This is long term, right? And also being aware of your own background and how that's going to impact. Because we like to think like once we're grown, like our past doesn't impact us, but our past does. We carry that baggage into into adulthood if we're not actively like healing and working through it. So being mindful is just that, being aware of what you're bringing to the table and what you hope to instill and teach and guide and connect and nurture your child with.
Yeah, and I totally understand that that parenting aspect of like you have a child, you feed them, you clothe them, you make sure that they're physically safe, and you just keep them out of harm, and that's it. What else is there
Mhm.
to it, right? You're safe, you're fed, you're clothed, you have a roof over your head. What else is there, right? But this is a
Mhm.
whole like separate human being, separate from yourself, from their with their own thoughts and feelings, and their thoughts and feelings are shaping the way that they see the world, and they need that guidance from you. They need that helping hand as someone who's obviously older and
Mhm.
been there and has more experiences, but also as someone that they trust and is very close to them, right? So as a parent, you just have that really special relationship with your child. You are their guide, right? And I really like what you said about dealing with your own trauma and dealing with your past in parenting. Can you kind of like elaborate on that?
Yeah, so when we have our own traumas and our own past, um, we're gonna bring that into like whatever relationship, whatever space that we're in, because it's something that has profoundly impacted you at a time when you were developing, right? Like as a
Mhm.
child, that's a crucial time of development. So when
Mhm.
these traumas are happening, and it's not just the big traumas, like we say, it's also like emotional abuse, right? It's
Mhm.
verbal abuse, it's neglect, it's so much. There's a lot of different traumas that can have happened,
Mhm.
but sometimes those things are normalized, like this is how we were raised, like it's fine.
Yeah.
And it's not fine because we're it's gonna come up, right? If we're raised in a household where we're invalidated, where we're like emotionally neglected,
Mhm.
uh, and we don't have those skills, and then we become a parent and we think, okay, that's how I was raised and I turned out okay, which we didn't. um, then it's okay for me to continue this cycle and raise my child this way. So now you have another generation that's being emotionally neglected,
Mhm.
invalidated, maybe manipulated, and then
Mhm.
now they have to deal with that because we didn't heal our own selves. Now our child has to deal with that as well.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I really like the way that you connected, the way that we were raised and we just pass it on because we turned out okay. But
Mhm.
obviously, that's not really true. If we have a lot of unresolved trauma that we're carrying into our future, we're carrying into our children's lives. How
Mhm.
can somebody just like reckon with that? We're just so busy, and the logistics of living a lot of time just kind of get in the way. You're just going, going, going. I was reflecting on this personally, and I had my child at a young age. I was 20 years old. I went back to college, and I did my undergraduate and my graduate, and I was just literally on autopilot, right? And I
Mhm.
look back, and along with youth and inexperience and just the busyness of life, it
Mhm.
really occurred to me that I was like, wow, I thought I was doing well. I thought I was doing differently than my parents and what I got, but I also feel like I failed in a lot of aspects. I guess as
Mhm.
a parent, one, how do you deal with that like sense of failure? And then
Mhm.
how do parents deal with like the busyness of life? How do they
Mhm.
embed that mindfulness and that consciousness into their parents?
Mhm. Mhm. So I always tell parents, like, it's not like I don't want them to feel like they failed, because
Mhm.
number one, there's no such thing as like a perfect parent, right? We're all
Mhm.
actively trying to just do better. Um,
Mhm.
it's about recognizing that um, this is not maybe how I want to parent, and I want to do better, and what are the
Mhm.
steps that I can do. So not really like feeling shame or guilt.
Mhm.
Those feelings can keep us stuck. Uh,
Yeah.
but it's more about like being compassionate and like, okay, I didn't know better, but now I
Mhm.
do. So what can I do differently? Like, how can I show up differently for my child in the way that I parent? And I feel like the world we live in is so busy. I remember um, when I had my first child too, I was a young mom. I was 18. I was starting out undergrad. I was trying to figure out who I was at that time. Right? Like you're like, okay, what do I even want to major in? But here I am. I'm raising a child now. So that it's so normal to get caught up in the busyness and the day to day. Right? We're either in
Mhm.
school, we're working, we're taking the kids to different activities,
Mhm.
food, clean. Like there's so many things on our plates.
Mhm.
So it's really about simplifying. It's not about feeling like I have to do this long list of parenting goals in order to be like this amazing parent. It's
Mhm.
about maybe on the drive to where you're going, like what kind of conversations do you have? Are you talking to them about like the things that you need to discipline them for, or is it really about like how was your day? Like
Yes.
having those like easy, open conversations, like joking. Maybe at dinner you guys are talking. Maybe you guys will watch like like the child's favorite movie. Just really simple things to kind of help connect you guys, and doing those and not feeling like it's like this gigantic, overwhelming task that you have to do, but really how are you guys talking? How are you guys connecting? And what kind of conversations are you having? I feel like a lot of the times as parents, we're like, I have like a few minutes to check in with my child. I'm going to go through
Mhm.
like, are they doing their homework? Like I got an email from the teacher. And like when all your conversations are centered around like you need to do better, like you're doing something wrong, like the kid is
Mhm.
it's you guys are not connecting at that moment.
Mhm.
So they know like every time that you talk with them, it's something else that they've done wrong,
Yeah.
versus you're building that connection of like, you're my child, like I love you, like I know your interests, I know who you are as a human, and I'm here to guide you. And yes, you may stumble and make mistakes, like that's part of being human.
Mhm.
And you may have trouble at school, and we're going to figure things out. Like what is the approach that we're using? So in our busy day-to-day lives, I really want parents to just sort of take a moment to see like what check in and reflect on like what conversations am I having with my kid? Do I feel connected with my child? Do we have moments of like uninterrupted like conversation that's just like, genuine,
Mhm.
easy, laid back, um, and building off of there, not feeling like, oh, I have to be able to accomplish this when I'm not even able to have like a regular conversation with my kid.
Oh my gosh, that is just so powerful, like the connection that you have with your child. And I do
Mhm.
think that we get bogged down with, like we said, the busyness of life and school assignments, and maybe even getting in trouble at school, or maybe even not doing something at home. But just connecting with your child to let them know that you see them, right, and that they're a person. They're a person separate from like just being your child or being a student or
Mhm.
anything else. Like they are a person. And I think a lot of times we get so wrapped up in who we want them to be that we
Mhm.
don't really see who they are and accept them for who they are. And I think a lot of parents also struggle with accepting their kids for who they
Mhm.
are, and do like use kind of manipulation techniques
Mhm.
to get them to be someone else. Um,
Mhm.
what do you think parents can do when their kid doesn't exactly turn out the way that they wanted them to be?
Mhm. Mhm. I think as parents, we do have like this vision of like the child that we think we're gonna get,
Mhm.
and it turns out we don't always get that child, and it's for good reason, right? We have this unique individual in front of us.
Yeah.
So seeing like what is this, like who do we want them to be, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then seeing who they are, how can we get them there without changing like their unique personality, right? So I want my child to be a self-sufficient, healthy, content adult. How can I get them there, right? And
Mhm.
I like to use like, for example, in our community, it's like, okay, we want our kids to be doctors because we want that financial security for them.
Mhm.
So you have a child who loves art. Are you
Yeah.
going to like diminish their creativity? Are you going to squash that dream of them so that they can be and reach this goal? Or how can we funnel that interest that you have? You want to pursue art. How can we funnel that into a way that you can still reach the goal of, being able to take care of yourself, having that financial security,
Mhm.
having like, having being a self-sufficient adult. How can I guide you to that without taking away from who you are, right? Um,
Mhm.
and parenthood is not about molding our child into who we want them to be. It's about, guiding our child on this journey of life, and supporting them. And
Yeah.
yes, we do have to like, um, teach them different ways of doing things, right? Like
Mhm.
you can't throw a tantrum like as an adult, like how can I help you release whatever you're feeling in a healthy and productive way.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that we, kind of have to like teach along the way, but it doesn't mean that we're changing who they are. We're giving them skills to navigate life, is how I like to look at it, versus I'm changing you so that you become this person because that's what I think is good for you. And I honestly, I believe it comes from a good place when parents are trying to,
Yeah.
they want something good for their child.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, how can we go about it in a way that's like, that feels good to the parent, but also feels good to the child. We don't want the child to feel like, okay, I'm not good enough for my parents.
Yes.
It can lead to like low self-esteem, which can
Mm-hmm.
mood. Like it sends them down a downward spiral. So how can we do it in a way that both people are happy with it?
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, like, especially I'm raising an adolescent, and you had just told me yours just turned 12, right? And I think we get to this age as well of adolescence where their identity starts to form, right? And their way of connecting to the world. And I like to tie this to like us being, immigrant parents, even though you and I are probably either 1.5 or second generation. How can immigrant parents, deal with the way that their children's identity is being formed in this new country that they're raising them in, which contradicts a lot of their belief systems and their cultural systems? How can like immigrant parents deal with that and still have a good relationship with their child and still allow their children to like flourish and soar, without feeling that they're conceding or giving up on their beliefs or cultural beliefs?
You said something that sparked a thought, conceding, right?
Yeah.
And I was reading something where it said like it's not a competition between like you and your child, because then someone's gonna lose, right?
Mm.
And you don't want your kid to lose, and you don't want to lose either. But like, how
Yeah.
can we work together? Like, so not viewing it as a competition.
Mm-hmm.
But to get back to your point about raising our children in a culture that's like different, right?
Yes.
It's I think parents have to realize that we are not back home, so we have to accept the fact that now this is home right now. So how can we raise our children in a way that they're able to have both of their identities? So being an American, because it's true, like our kids are Americans, like this is home to them. While also knowing like where they come from and their culture and holding tight to that. But when we are solely focused on, we are Somali, like this is who we are, we don't do this, we don't do that, we don't do this, and the kid maybe doesn't even speak the language, has never gone to the country, really has no connection, and you're saying this is all that they can be, like that's it's something that's like not achievable, right?
Yeah.
So then the kid is gonna, so sorry, this is my research, so if I start to ramble, stop me.
Please start. I love this stuff so much. Tell me more. I'm just soaking it up.
Yeah. So with identity development, it's a stage of development. There are different stages of development. So in this stage, they're figuring out who they are. So as parents, when we're saying you are Somali, like that's it, the way don't be like American scale or like American, like you're pretending to be American. When that's how they identify as American, because maybe they're born here or they've been here for their entirety of their lives.
Yeah.
They speak the language, they know the culture, like they know how to navigate like living here, and you're telling them they can't be it. But they also don't fit into, so like they're in this place of not belonging, right? Especially for our Somali kids, as being Black, as being Somali, America is also not the best place for Black people, right? You're being told like you're not, like you're less than, essentially, and we see it so much now. But when you're being told, okay, you're not American enough because number one, you're Black. Number two, you have an immigrant background. And then on the other hand, you're being told you're not Somali enough. You don't speak the language, or you speak it with the accent. You have not even gone to the country. It's like, where do I belong? So they're in this in between where they don't belong. And as a human, you want to belong, you want to connect with
Absolutely.
people. So how do we do that in a way that like our kids we accept their Americanness and the quirks that come with that, right?
Mhm.
And then we also are like, okay, and this is where you come from. You come from a rich culture, a rich background, and teaching them that culture in a way that's not like you're lacking. So I need to teach you this so that you stop whatever it is that I don't want you to do, because we don't do
Yeah.
it. But knowing like this is an amazing background, these are your ancestors, like showing them in a way that like builds them up versus
Mhm.
like versus coming at it from a way that they're lacking something. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important, because what we see is when kids have like a secure identity, is what we call it, and they feel like, okay, like I've got, like, I'm American and I'm Somali, they have much better outcomes. Like it's a protective factor against like racism, discrimination.
Mhm.
Um, it's a protective factor against like depression and anxiety, because they have that connectedness, they have that community to fall back on.
Mhm.
So it has so many positive outcomes that we really have to put more of an effort
Mhm.
in helping them like stay connected to their community, while also accepting that, yes, things are going to look different. They're going to do things, they're going to talk about things that maybe I'm not familiar with.
Mhm.
And that's an outcome of the culture of the place that I live in now. It's not realistic to think I'm going to live in America and my kid is not going to have any connection with it. And I think a lot of the times parents feel like because their kid is like living here and picking up things, picking up habits, like, okay, I've got to take them back home now, which in itself can be a very traumatic thing as well. So understanding that you live here, so your kid is going to have both, and maybe they'll lean
Mhm.
more towards the American side, and maybe sometimes they'll lean more towards the Somali side. But you as a parent, how can you guide them in being able to carry both? Because that's essentially what we want.
That is essentially what we want, right? We don't want them, even I, who most people would probably describe me, I don't know why, but they describe me as Americanized or Westernized. But even I'd like my son to retain, some of our Somaliness, right? Still, but I have to recognize, like, this is where he's born. My son also has American heritage, right? His father is African American, right? This is part and parcel of his story, and I just kind of have to just accept that. So acceptance is like key. But even as you have mentioned, even if both of his parents were Somali, he would still be growing up in this environment. He would still primarily, most of the time, speaking English because he'd be speaking it at school with his friends and at the grocery store. It's just everywhere. So retaining that Somaliness becomes more intentional, right? And I think sometimes some of our parents expect that without intentionally teaching the kids, or without shaming the kids for not knowing Somali, or for not knowing Somali culture, or not adhering to Somali culture, not understanding that your environment does play a lot of part in who you are and who you develop to be. What's some ways that we can connect to like our Somali parents and basically let them know, if you aren't very committed to your child retaining his or her Somaliness, you kind of have to be intentional about this, like in a positive way, without shaming them and without guilting them by not knowing things that maybe you've never taught them. Or maybe you've only set them in a kind of off remark. Allah, okay, Somali but I haven't really made an effort. I'm kind of preaching to the choir right now because like Somali but what did I do intentionally to make that happen? Right now, on top of my head, I can't think of anything. I speak English to him. He goes to an English speaking school. He has, American friends, obviously, who are English speaking, even the Somali ones. So what is a parent to do? How can we like allow them to how can we embed in them to retain that Somaliness?
I think that's an important part of like, what are we doing as parents? And again, we have to be intentional about what we are doing. It's not just like, oh, we're Somali, so it should automatically like happen. We don't live like back home. everyone's speaking the language. Like the culture is the main culture, but whereas here you gotta put in more effort. And like you, my kids also don't speak Somali. So it's something that I want to do. I want to have them speak it. I want them to be able to know where they come from and sharing the beauty of it. And I think it's also me, like what do I know, right? What am I doing? And I have to learn too. I was born here in America, so it's like my kids are like twice removed from back home. But it's about being intentional about what we want to share, what we want to instill with them, and how are we doing that, and understanding that it's not the main culture, so we've got to put in like double the work, right? And when Corona's not around, like, is it possible to take trips back home as a family, not just taking the kid there, but like as a family, like showing them parts, showing them countries where like people look like them, where they speak like like they've heard their parents or maybe their grandparents speak. And I think as a community, like when we do hear children who are trying to speak the language, not saying like, oh, like making fun of them, right? Like not saying like, oh, they're speaking with an accent, like it's a second language to them. Even if their parents speak it fluently, it's new.
And accepting that, right? That it's a second language to them. How can, like, it's hard for parents, and it's kind of, sorry to interrupt, like a grieving kind of, there's some grief, on the parents' part that English is their kid's first language. Like, so there's like some dealing with your grief there, and accepting that, and then teaching the Somali as a second language, and accepting that, and there's so much grief there. So how can we, like, I don't know, a lot of times when I was younger as an adolescent, I always felt like, oh, my parents don't understand. Like, even as a young adult, I would be like, gosh, I live in this country, this is all I know, my parents don't understand. But as I got older and I had my child, obviously at a young age, I reflected back as a parent, and I realized all the grief that our parents carry of losing their country, of like losing their sense of normality, of like not hearing their own language spoken everywhere like they used to. And then now they have to contend with the fact that even their kids don't speak their language. So it's kind of like there's so much grief, I feel, that our parents or the older generations carry.
They do, because I feel like tradition is really important in our community. Language, storytelling, like all of these components are big in our culture. And when they see the next generations not speaking the language, not knowing the culture, not knowing a lot of like key things in the culture, like there is that grief, right? There's that loss. I've come to this country, and that loss is associated with the new country, whether it's here in America or like the UK or like wherever we our parents have immigrated to or went to as refugees. There's that loss is associated with that country. So then there's that animosity against that country, right? The country is now bad. Whereas we have to, it's allowing that grief to happen and understanding that it may not look the same, but there's still ways that we can, continue the culture, continuing the language. Like you said, it may not be the first language, but it could be the second language, right? So understanding that it's going to look different, and understanding that there is pain with it looking different. Because for so long, for so many generations, it's looked one way, and now we're here and we're shaking things up and things are looking differently. And different isn't always bad, but I can definitely see how it's painful for the older generations.
It is. There really is. And like the older that I get, the more, I really connect with our older generation. And I feel, that I understand the trauma and the grief, that I didn't understand my young self, because my young self, I just wanted to live and fit in and, form my own identity separate from my parents. So there's also that in identity development, especially in adolescence, that we want to form an identity different from our parents, because we want to, we want to make it out, stand on our own. We want to make it out there on our own. So sometimes our kids also go against us purposefully so that they can have their own identity. So there's like kind of layers, I guess, in studying identity development, right, it's kind of understood as that's just what happened. But I guess in immigrant parents, it's just kind of another affront. You know what I mean? Another way that, you know, your kids are just going the wrong way. You touched
Mhm.
on visiting the motherland or visiting, you know, back home. And
Mhm.
sometimes parents do just send their kids back home in an
Mhm.
effort, you know, in an effort to save them, right? It's all
Mhm.
well,
Yeah.
there's this saying, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
In an effort to save their kids. And I
Mhm.
went through Dakan Alis, right? I was sent back
Mhm.
home, not to Somalia, but to Kenya when I
Mhm.
was 14. And what I always comment on it later on is that it really severed the connection between
Mhm.
parent and child for my parents and myself.
Mhm. Mhm.
So sometimes parents do take these drastic actions, not realizing the real ramifications of it. The
Mhm.
real ramifications is a lost connection now with your child. You had
Mhm.
more influence when you had a connection with them. So,
Mhm.
um, what are some, you have talked about some intentional ways of establishing connection, but what
Mhm.
about when the connection is disrupted or ruptured some way? What are some ways
Mhm.
that parents can restore connection with their children?
Mhm. So when they've made that, when that rupture has happened, so essentially a mistake has happened, right? The parent has made a mistake and now that connection has been broken and the child is like not trusting of the parent anymore. And the parent has to own up like, okay, like I've done wrong here. And that's hard for a lot of parents to own up to, that the fact that
Mm-hmm.
while I may have had good intentions, I've caused harm.
Mm,
That's the first thing, is like owning up to the mistake that you've done. And secondly is apologizing. And again, another hard thing for parents to do. Um,
all parents.
all parents, and in the work that I do, I never want parents to feel like I'm speaking ill of parents who do things differently than me, right?
Mm,
And I never want to come off as like I'm speaking ill of like older generations or like
mhm.
the how like maybe our community does things. I never want to come off from that way.
Mhm.
Um, and I always say we can always do better, right? The way that
Yes.
we're doing now does not have to be the end all. So when I'm sharing these things, know that it's something that I also struggle with. I make mistakes, and I've had to own up to it, and I've had to make that repair.
Yes.
Um, and I think that's in all the work and all the information that I share, it's always like these are things that I'm also doing too. Like it's not
Mhm.
like I've reached the promised land, like I've made it, and now like I'm teaching people who need help. No, like I'm
Yes.
in this with other parents too.
Yes.
So owning up to that mistake, apologizing, which means humbling yourself, right?
Mm,
Parents, we're not perfect, you know, and it's okay for our kids to see that we're not perfect. It's okay for
mhm.
our kids to see us make mistakes, because as parents, we're modeling how to fix that mistake. We're
Mm,
modeling, you know, communication. We're modeling that we may cause harm in our lives to people. We're not perfect. We struggle. We're human.
mhm.
So owning up, apologizing, hearing the kid out, like how has it impacted them? What did it feel like when we made that mistake? And then talking about like what can I do differently? Like how can I fix this? And again, it's working together with your kid. It's not like I'm the parent, I know better. I had good intentions. Like if they felt that way, that's on them. No, then
Mm,
that kid has lost out, and we don't want that either. It's
mhm.
about, okay, like I had good intentions. It didn't pan out the way I wanted to.
Mhm.
Own up. I caused harm. I need to make a repair. And then I need to work with my kid to see, like, no, I need to hear their side of the story. How did it impact them? And then work together to fix it. And you can say, like, this is what I intended to do, but
Mhm.
not excusing the harm that you caused, because you have caused a real harm, and you should validate uh,
Yes.
child on how they feel.
Exactly. And not like, you know, not determining how they should have felt, right?
Mhm,
They
mhm,
they obviously felt something and it hurt them, you know,
mhm,
no matter your intentions. And I think
mhm,
it's a really hard thing, you know, for parents to do that. And that humility required to apologize to your child. Sometimes parents feel that that makes their child lose respect for them as this all-knowing being. But the reality of the matter is that we're not all-knowing beings. We're just humans. And,
mhm,
you know, like you and I had talked about how we had our children young, we were
mhm,
also trying to figure out who we were. So of course
mhm,
we didn't have all of the answers. Not that you could even have the answers at, I don't know, 40 or 50. Life is, a process, a journey, right? But a time as well of, of self-discovery during your 20s, where you're just trying to figure out, who am I? You also have to raise another being and help them become who they are. And it's it's quite a challenge. So we are not perfect. That is definitely the message. I really like this comment that somebody made in the comments, and they said the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents. And I really, really, gosh, that resonates with me. Because I'm a single mom, right? And I have all these like lofty goals for my son. And sometimes we project onto our children. We want them to have all the things that we think we didn't get. And we feel we're making all of these sacrifices for them. And one, they should be grateful. But two, in their young, very undeveloped mind, they should understand where we're coming from. And it's so unfair. I remember my little guy was like in the 5th grade, right? And we had gone to a school meeting, and I remember hearing myself speak. I remember right now myself, and I'm just kind of embarrassed. And I'm like, yes, Roun knows I have high hopes for him. I raised him as a single mom, and he should know. And later on, like a few years later, I realized to myself, how on earth is a 5th grader supposed to know that, right? Sometimes we just project a lot of things on these young, not fully developed minds, and we make them feel guilty for their existence, and we make them live the lives that we wanted to live. Right? So what are some ways like parents can like catch themselves before it's too late? Because I feel like I caught myself, And when I said, I apologized, then I said, that was wrong. There's no way at that age or even now that you can understand that. Your life is your life. You go through your own journey, right? Not what sacrifices I've made. You deserve that just by existing, by being in this world. You have value just by your existence. Right? So what are some ways parents can catch themselves before it's like too late, before they have these, young adults that are out of high school, maybe in college, just kind of traumatized?
I think that shows like as parents, so something that I talk to parents about is like their unmet needs, making sure that you're meeting your own needs and not using your child as a way to fill that. So when parents aren't able to like achieve what they set out, not using their child as a vehicle to achieve that, right? Their child is their own self, like their own individual being that's gonna, navigate life way differently than we are. And accepting that the way that like the goals that they have and what they're going to achieve, like that's their life. I don't want them to live out what I intended to live out. And understanding that like the work that we're putting into parenting is not to get paid. Like we're not looking to get paid by them achieving what we want them to achieve, right? My goal in parenting is to raise, again, a self-sufficient, adult who's able to be happy, healthy, content, whatnot. And so me saying, oh, like I've sacrificed so much for you. Like I am, like I had sleepless nights. I hear parents say it a lot. Like, I used to wake up at night for you. Like I've worked 2 jobs to fulfill like you, like, we have to do that. We're parents. Like that's our job. Our children ask to come into the world, it's part of being a parent, and I'm not doing that, but it seems like there's that, there's like this currency of like, I'm doing this for you. So that means later on down the road, when I tell you to do X, Y, and Z, like you have to do it because I did that in the past for you. And that's fair.
And that isn't fair, right? But also if I may touch on some cultural expectations, right? I feel that there is that cultural expectation in Somali culture, though, that we do that. That because our parents raised us, that we do listen, that when they say jump, we say how high without question. Otherwise, then it's tied to us being asi. And, we are like told on Kohawari, even though there isn't a legitimate reason. you know, to
Mhm.
curse me, right? So how do we deal with that? How do we tell like all other parents, like, actually, you know, there isn't really a justifiable reason for you to say this to me right now without getting further wrath from them?
Mhm. Well, that's it's so difficult because there is that expectation of I've done all this for you and now you've got to do X, Y, and Z for me because like you owe me essentially.
Mm.
And like there are ways that we can fulfill like our parental responsibilities, that we can be like that we can show up for them without living our life for them, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But our culture is in a way that it's hard for us to do that because it doesn't look like what they want, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're thinking that they're putting in all this effort and you're gonna do exactly what they want. Whereas you're like, I'm here for you, like I'm your kid, I'll show up, I'll fulfill whatever responsibility that I need to,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm living my own life. And that's where
Yeah.
the conflict comes in because the way that you live your life may not be what they want.
And that's really hard, right? Because a lot of I love reading parenting books, right? But a lot of things that I read about mindfulness and that I read about consciousness is about accepting our kids the way that they are. And when I look at our community, I don't really see that a lot. And so there is like that disconnect from accepting our kids for who they are and feeling like we raised good kids. Right. And
Right.
our ego is tied to our parenting ability, or the evidence is how well our kids turned out, right? And that just kind of reflects back on how competent we are, our social standing in our society. Otherwise, you know, while I need the way your kid turned out, that kind of stuff. So like, how do we, knowing that, like, how do we still show up for our kids in an authentic way, like that honors who they are? Or do we just say, well, forget what other people think, you know, I'm going to show up for my child the way they need me to?
So that's my approach. Like I'm showing up for my kid in the way that they need me to. And if that's not meeting community standards, and so be it, because I'm not raising my kid for the community, right? I'm raising my kid for who they are. I'm showing up for them, who they are and what they need. And then that may not always align with what the community needs, right? For those of us who are, I'm always optimistic that our generation can do things differently, right? So I feel like for our generation, we'll understand that the way we parent our kids matters more than what the community thinks, right? Our kids are, and I think normalizing struggle, normalizing making mistakes, because that's a part of life. Like it's almost unheard of to go through life unscathed by some sort of experience, right? So to assume that we'll raise this kid without having any of that, and we'll have some polished individual to show off to the community, like it doesn't make sense. And I promise you, everyone in the community has their own struggles. They just don't talk about it. It's swept under the rug. So everyone's going off like, oh, my kid is achieving this and my kid is achieving that. And you're like, well, my kid is struggling. Like, what's wrong with me? And like we can't do that to ourselves. We can't do that to our kids. So I think that's key. Number one, understanding that you're raising your child. You're not raising your child for the community. Understanding that other people are also going through struggles. They just may not talk about it. We have a very big shame culture that keeps us from talking about things. And then understanding that, like, if your kid is going through something, like, number one, it's not automatically because of you as a parent. It could be due to like their personality, their temperament, something that's going on in like the environment. And yes, sometimes that means us, like maybe we're, you know, invalidating, maybe we're shaming, but reflecting on that, like it's not always like us. Like sometimes your kid may be more emotional, like that doesn't necessarily mean like you're doing something wrong. But it takes a lot of reflecting, a lot of being intentional, a lot of like sitting with yourself and really like reflecting on it, which not a lot of people do. And it's not about like, it's not always about time. We're driving, we have time to reflect that. We have time to reflect at the end of the day. It's just, are we choosing to do that?
That's key. It's key. I'll
Mhm.
be choosing. And also, what I found for myself is patience.
Mhm.
Because sometimes when you want to make a change, you just want the change instantly and you want your life to be instantly fixed. But
Mhm.
knowing that the little things that you're doing add up and then
Mhm.
lead up to that bigger change that you want to make in your life. And I think that has made a huge difference for me in my life. That
Mhm.
change is just small and incremental, and it's just kind of a daily habit, a practice that you continuously do, and it's not a one fix.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
really appreciate this conversation a lot. The biggest thing for me and the biggest takeaway again, that affirmed kind of how I felt before about parenting is that connection, that connection
Mhm.
with your child,
Mhm.
and that they know that you are there for them, that you're raising them, obviously not for the community, for themselves, right? So that they
Mhm.
are content, happy, self-sufficient,
Mhm.
can emotionally like regulate themselves, giving them the life skills that they need. And I think that's such a big deal. Some of the
Mhm.
things that parents sometimes don't talk about, that we need to still talk to them, especially I feel like in our community, about drug and alcohol usage, about
Mhm.
sex and sexuality. How do you propose that, coming from our conservative, community, how we approach these subjects? Because either way, our kids are going to learn about it.
Mhm.
And so either we give them well-informed information, or
Mhm.
their friends or the media or the popular
Mhm.
culture is going to give them.
Mhm.
How do you think we can broach these subjects ourselves as parents without outsourcing the job?
Mhm. I think again, that's a part of parenting, right? That's included in parenting.
Mm-hmm.
But when there's that fear of like, if I talk about this, then my kid will be interested in it or my
Mm-hmm.
kid will do it. I think that becomes a barrier. If like, okay, if I don't talk about it, if I don't acknowledge it, then they won't know about it and all will be well. And
Yeah.
it's not the case. That's not the case. You want to have these discussions because number one, you're um, like you're a trusted source, right? Like you know the information that you're providing to your child versus them seeking out the information from online, from peers, where you're not really sure what they're getting. Because if it's not
Mm-hmm.
coming from you, it's going to come from somebody else. So you
Mm-hmm.
might as well like hold the reins on that conversation and show them like I'm here, like we can talk about it, like let's discuss this. Um, let's talk about substance use. Like you might have heard like people using different things. Like let's have these conversations. Let's have this discussion about like puberty, like as simple as puberty. Some parents are not even talking about that. Like your kid is gonna go through normal developmental changes. Don't make it seem like it's like it's not shameful for them to to for their body to change, for them to
Mm-hmm.
start wanting to maybe do something like
Mm-hmm.
talk about it. Don't shame them, don't, and then that way when they have more like questions, when they want to like process something, they know, okay, I can go to Hoya, I can go to Abba, like I can go to my
Mm-hmm.
parents and talk to them about this, and I'm not going to get in trouble for it. Versus
Right.
like your kid talks about like, oh, I have a crush on so and so. It's like, Eb, like we don't do that. Like crushes, like it's normal. Like it's normal, right?
Right.
And as a parent, you want to guide um, based off of like your values, based off of like what's healthy, and you can still reach your goals. Like if that is your goal, like you don't want your child to have premarital sex, okay,
Mm-hmm.
are you talking to them about it? Like are you talking to them about like your values?
Mm-hmm.
Have you instilled that from the get-go? When they do have these desires, are they able to come process it with you? Like what are you doing versus like don't talk about it, don't do it, because America has like almost all abstinence only sex education in schools, and teen pregnancy is really common. So like
Mm-hmm.
that's not it. Like how are
So it's
you
not
having,
working.
yeah, it's not working. So how can you have these discussions and still reach the goal that you want, for your child,
Mm-hmm.
um, while at the same time holding a safe space for them when they're telling you things that maybe don't align. And I think that's important. Like as a parent, we have to check ourselves at the same time. And but again, we have that shame culture of like, don't even speak about it, don't even
Mm-hmm.
talk about it, um, and just assume that your kid is not doing something. Whereas it's happening, it's being talked about and everywhere but your house. So
Yeah, and that's a problem,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's
yeah.
a problem. It's being talked about everywhere but your house, so they're not receiving information that's maybe true or accurate, or maybe it goes against, your personal values or the values that you wanted to instill in your child.
Mm-hmm.
And not talking about it is not a deterrent. And
Mm-hmm.
I really like that you touched on, if I don't talk about it, then I'm not giving them any ideas. They already have these ideas because, they're in this environment,
Mm-hmm.
it is available, right?
Mm-hmm.
As their body is changing, they do have these desires. You need to approach it. You cannot just ignore this.
Mm-hmm. And as a parent, we have to realize we were teenagers once too, right? Like we
Right.
were teenagers. I think a lot of parents forget, like, you were a teen once too. Like, what happens during that time. Be there for your kid in a way that you need it at that time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what we got to do.
That's really what we got to do. I wanted to give people an opportunity to ask any questions. I realized somebody said something. I like this one, how people handle anger, I guess.
Mhm.
Somebody said, what would you tell a mom, or what kind of advice would you give a mom that seems to be always angry and annoyed with her children?
Mm. I think so. I would tell that mom that like, something's going on for her. Sometimes it's
Mm,
not about the kid at all. The kid is just
there.
where the kid is just there, so they get impacted.
Mm,
Um, but something that I know a lot of moms, myself included, struggle with is our unmet needs, taking
mm,
time for ourselves. When you're feeling burnt out, you're more angry, you're more irritable. When you are trying to do everything yourself, you start to resent the people in your house. So it's about that mom needing to check in with herself. Like, what do I need? What is going on for me? Do I need to delegate some tasks? Like, how old are the kids? Can they chip in? Um, do I need some time off? Like, parenting is hard. Sometimes you just need like a weekend away, a night away. Uh,
yeah. Well, what
sometimes,
about the single parents that are dealing? Especially I feel like in our community, a lot of single moms that have
mhm,
multiple kids, like
mhm,
4, 5, 6,
yeah.
on their own.
hmm I think in that moment, it's about really, it's as parents, as moms, we really need a community. We really need a village. And sometimes it can take some time to find people to lean on. But it's
Mm-hmm.
in those moments where you're like, you know what, like, I just need help. And allowing them to show up for you. Sometimes allowing people to show up is hard. It's like, I
Yes.
don't want them to see what my house looks like. I don't want them
Mm-hmm.
to see me struggling. But
Yeah.
it's in the moment that you need them to show up when you're struggling.
Yeah.
Um, and not like, if you need to order takeout, if the kids are just going to have peanut butter sandwiches, like, what can you do to take something off your plate so that you can just breathe a little bit?
Yes.
And for those of you who know single moms who just show up for them, like, what can I do? Don't say, like, call me if you need me, but what can I, like, literally show up and be like, what can I do? Do you want me to take the kids? Can I watch the kids? Do you want to go take a nap? Like, we have to show up for each other. And I think we've lost that touch, being here, because everyone does have their own things, but I think we can
Mm-hmm.
all spare like an hour or two here to show up for somebody and be like, go sleep, go take a bath uninterrupted. And it's as simple as that. It doesn't have to be like going away. I know it's
Yeah.
a luxurious dream sometimes.
Right.
Taking a nap, not worrying like the kids are gonna, destroy something or like cause harm to themselves.
Yeah.
And so, like, what can the people in the community do to help
Mm.
other people?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm really glad that you touched on that. A lot of times, like, women are expected to be martyrs, especially
Mhm,
moms. You're
mhm,
supposed to be this not null that can handle everything. And it's just that, like that Black woman's trope of being this
mhm,
superhuman. I
mhm,
think mothers are also put in that situation, especially Somali mothers are supposed to be able to handle all
mhm,
of that. Some of them even work outside of the home too and have,
mhm,
have a lot of children. And it's like, you're just a human being. You're not a superhuman. And I feel like culturally also, we need to do away with some damaging like narrative that moms are these superhuman and that moms need to sacrifice their mental and emotional and physical health, the running of their household. Like, people need help. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that people need to show up for others. I really like Zainab's question, and I think Zainab touched on like kind of like the cultural underlining of having a lot of kids. So she said, why do we want to have kids? Do we even ask ourselves that question before even conceiving a child? Why have a child? For us, for God, for the kids? Or are we having kids because that's what's expected from us by the community?
Yeah, please, if you don't have kids, check in with yourself. Why are you like, what is your goal? Do you want to have kids? Like, what is the reasoning for wanting to have kids? But we do live in a culture where it's like, it's expected. Like, you get married and you have kids and you have a lot of kids, because you got to carry on the family name. Having a lot of kids is seen as like, status. I've heard women being told, like, if you're not having a lot of kids for him, like, he's going to go off and marry someone else that will have a lot of kids for him. So really, like, check in with yourself on why, because being a parent is hard. And if you don't want the kids, like, that makes it 10 times more harder. So what is your goal? What is your intention for even wanting to be a parent? Really checking in with yourself. And it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality of the relationships that you're having. There are people who have a lot of kids that are able to have really good connections with their kids, really like quality relationship with their children. But not everybody is able to do that, and that's okay. Do what you're able to do. For some people, 5 kids is okay. For some people, 1 or 2. Like, so being okay with where you are and understanding that the community will have some things to say, but you're living your life for you and not for the community.
Absolutely. And to quote Rihanna, people will talk and say, good or bad, no matter what you're doing, whether you're doing good or bad, people will talk. Like, it doesn't even matter what you do. I think the last question, I really want to be cognizant of everybody's time. And I think this was about the language. How about when parents do not speak foreign language and kids don't understand Somali? How could this poor communication lead to misunderstanding?
So that's really difficult when because kids pick up languages easier than adults. So when the kid is able to, speak the language and the parent is not, again, so we're having the cultural differences, and then we also have language barrier, and that just kind of like adds to the gap, that generational gap that we see between parents and kids. So the not speaking the language and not knowing the culture, it deepens, it elongates that gap. It's hard because then the kid has like a leg up on the parent in that sense, because they're able to sort of navigate this world, this culture, this country a little bit easier than the parent who doesn't speak the language, is having to rely on people to translate for them. So this is where, again, that community piece comes in of like, does a parent have supports of people who are able to, like, if I'm going to school and my kid is translating, they may not be accurate in everything that they're telling me. Do I have people who can show up with me? When it comes to my kid, like, how am I, what am I doing to connect with them? And where can I educate myself on the culture and from a place that I respect? But again, it's really hard because a parent is not speaking the language and the kid maybe is not understanding the language of the parent, and that divide deepens, which is where the parent has to put in a little extra to, sort of educate themselves on it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Roun. I want to be cognizant of your time and everybody's time. I think it's like 4 now. It's been nearly an hour. I really appreciate your time and absolutely support, the work that you're doing. The parenting is just really important to me, and learning about development and, about identity development and human development. I just find that, just so important. And I just kind of want to tell everybody too that Roun is really inspiring me to put in my own application for a PhD program in human development and family science, because I think it's just so important. And it is something that, ignites me and excites me. And I've been looking like, throughout the year, I've been thinking about, well, what do I want to study? But then when you have told me about what you were studying, I was like, that is like exactly what sets my soul on fire. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I will probably, be harassing you, asking you ask for some information on, the right approach in terms of research, and kind of inquire about the work that you're doing, so that maybe we can work together in the future.
Yeah.
Really support what you're doing. And thank you so much for your time here today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation. This is a topic that I love and can talk about for hours on end. So thank you.
Me too. Kindred spirits. I appreciate you.
Yes. Thank you.
And thank you everybody else too for watching. I really appreciate you guys so much. One last comment from Zainab. I love Zainab so much. Zainab is my sister friend. She's amazing. She said, "You both inspire me so much. You're doing important work to contribute to the healing and uplifting of our community." Thank you.
Thank you. That's such a lovely comment.
That is amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Abaya. Have a wonderful day. Everybody, wonderful day.